Welcome everybody to the show. This is Counter Clipping show number 163 for March 4th, 2024. And I would love to thank everyone for coming out this evening. Thank you very much. If you haven't done so already, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already. The majority of people watching are actually not subscribed, which probably means they're not signed up for YouTube. We are clipping, I don't have the box handy, we are clipping Dead of Winter. We are just doing markers. Where did I put the markers? Yeah, it's down on the floor. I'll get it when I need it. We are clipping markers for great battles of the American Civil War. These will be going into one of these table trays that I like to use because the lids just come straight off and they nest underneath the tray, which makes them very convenient for markers and such that you might want to have handy at the table. I have these for a lot of the series games that I play a lot, and I had one for GBACW at one point. I'm not sure what happened to it. Obviously, I took it apart. We'll be doing it again since we plan to play GBACW at the upcoming Buckeye Game Fest. So let's get all the regular business out of the way. There's a bunch of ways to support the channel in the video description, so please check those out. Big shout out to James Edward Dosty, who is our newest Patreon supporter at the Warrior level. So thank you, James, very much. He'll be popping up in the title card at the end. And let me, if I didn't say this last week, and I might have, let me apologize to anybody I've left off the title card. Feel free to reach out to me and say, hey, where's my name on the ending credits thing? If somehow, I'm blaming Patreon for this because their crappy notification sometimes requires me to rebuild that whole thing from scratch. So it was, for anybody wondering, high 60s, maybe even low 70s today. A little bit of yard work got done, but not too much because it still got dark pretty early. So once again, thanks everybody for coming out. Quick update, not a new update, but let's do an update for the campaign for North Africa. And let's get the, forgot to put James in the ticker, so sorry about that. We are currently at 58% of the way toward our goal, toward obtaining the very highly priced campaign for North Africa from our good friends and sponsor of the Counter Clipping show, Noble Knight Games. We'll be hearing from them later. Thank you, Noble Knight. And there is an affiliate link in the video description. If you're going to buy games anyway, Noble Knight's a pretty good place to buy them, and you'll be helping out the channel in our completely unreasonable and unrealistic goal of obtaining a copy of Campaign for North Africa. There will be video on it when it arrives in that happy day, and it might be a 20-minute video of me crying, but it will happen. We are drinking this, I didn't forget, Laphroaig 10-year-old, the standard cask expression, bottled at a lovely 43%, which is what it's supposed to be. So thank you, Laphroaig. Not a sponsor, unfortunately. I should look into that. Delicious. Lots of people don't like that. So anyway, lots of lively discussion in the chat. So almost 130 people here already tonight. So before we go any further here, our topic is fog of war and other control questions surrounding war games. And we'll see how far we get into that. We may end up focusing on fog of war and talking about command and control at a later time. Pat Mullen, thanks so much for the super chat. Much appreciated. It can be about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So the real question is, how do we model fog of war in war games? Because honestly, a lot of war games simply ignore the question, and we will get into that. So thank you, Pat. Here for the free game. What free game? There's a giveaway tonight. Somebody didn't tell me that there was a giveaway. So thanks, Pat. Much appreciated. Let's also, however, say hello to Alan Salazar, Alistair Logie, Board Gaming Geezer, Bob Kowalczyk, Charles Latora, Brian Jarvis, Daniel Silverthorne, David Zell, E4 Airman from sunny Southern Ohio, Egret, Eric Goebel, the legend himself, Fucko is here, Jeff Beeler, Jeffrey Wesovich, Joe Faust, also from sunny Northeast Ohio, Joe Okabayashi, and Joe Faust is not very far from me nowadays, actually. Joel, John Longshore is here, John C. from the sunny Philippines, John Clark, Jonathan Dyer, Ken X or Ken 10, Kevin Flynn, Kevin, sorry, we'll get that character sheet problem squared away. I will have to look into that, and I just saw your email. So thank you for doing the digging on that. Lind Pratt from sunny Central Ohio. Marty Sample is here. Matt Davidson, Matt Van Wielden, Meandering Mike, Michael Avanzini, Michael Schmaus, Molotov Cockatiel Games, Neil Bedke, Patchwork Pictures, Pat Mullen, of course, is here. Already gotten a shout-out. Perfidious Albion, Perry Sporopoulos, Rob Johnson, Stigler is here. Stacking Limit is here. And I always want to say Stacking Limit because he's right next to Stigler in the list. The Grog Shed, The Command Tent, Tim Greenhaw, Tim Zales, Tony Mammal, and Vicky and William Aarons is here. So thanks, everybody. Sorry if I missed anybody, but it's YouTube's fault for not giving me a list that includes everybody who's here rather than the list of everybody who's commented in the last 5 minutes or whatever it is. So we will not be doing a giveaway of campaign. I don't know. You never know. I'm not committing myself to any such thing, but I might stink the place up so bad that I have to unload it. But if so, we'll probably not do that with Campaign for North Africa. We will see. So we will get to the topic. I don't know that I have any news. I do have news, actually. For those who are intrigued by The Fate of All, which is the Operational Ancients game that's coming out from Thin Red Lines, that's apparently ready to go. I got that notification and paid for it a couple days ago. Not too long afterwards, I found out that there is a use of AI art in the game, which is disappointing. But, we'll see how extensive that is. I'm not sure. I'm still parsing that information. So I will report back for those who are concerned about the use of AI art in wargames. And this might be, I don't know, it probably the first use of AI art that I've heard of from a publisher of traditional wargames. Let me put it that way. So, Stigler's going to be thrilled that we're doing GBACW at Buckeye Game Fest, I'm sure. Now, I'm not sure if we'll have multiple tables of that going or not. I think we're talking about Dead of Winter. I hope we're doing Dead of Winter because it's almost totally clipped now, and it'll probably be clipped by the end of the day. But we are going to do GBACW at Buckeye Game Fest. So even if that doesn't turn out to be Dead of Winter, and I think that is the going plan at this moment. That's the Battle of Stones River, which is in early 1863, as I recall. So it is an interesting battle. Rosecrans versus Bragg, the top tier of Civil War generals on both sides, as you can tell. Rosecrans kind of gets a bad rap, but he did have a really friggin' bad day at Chickamauga. Really, really bad. Worse, probably... No, I'd say Joe Hooker had a worse day at Chancellorsville. After thinking about that for just a moment, Joe Hooker, who was absolutely sessile at Chancellorsville, had a worse day than Rosecrans did at Chickamauga. The Army had a worse day at Chickamauga, but different. Oh yeah, that's true. It is like at the very, very end of the year, so it's like December 31st to January 1st or something like that. So it is, in fact, late 1862. Thank you for that correction. So, sessile, as in not moving. Sessile. Go ahead and look it up if you like. Anyway. John C. says that the Army had the worst day at Freddyburg. Well, the guys who were in Burnside's frontal assaults definitely had a bad day, but... while Fredericksburg was not a great day for the Union Army, to say the least, Chancellorsville was worse, I think, from a tactical and operational standpoint, and Chickamauga was definitely worse than Fredericksburg. Not necessarily in terms of casualties, though. Perfidious Albion mentioned, we'll get to the topic. Fear not, fear not. It's going to be a little bit tempting for me to continuously frame all the discussion that we have about whatever topic this evening in terms of American Civil War, because it is, there's some pretty significant screw-ups but again, the Hooker couldn't make any decisions, right? And we're talking about, Joe Hooker wasn't that bad of a corps or division commander, right? But you put him in charge of an army and he did not perform well. And then Rosecrans was just so stunned by the by what had just occurred, that he was like completely out of it after that. The Wilderness is a little bit later. We will get to the Wilderness. I don't know a lot about the Battle of the Wilderness, to be honest. I know roughly when it happens. I know roughly the ground on which it is fought. But other than that, I don't know that much. And you know why? Because I haven't played a game on the Wilderness. So get me a game on the Battle of the Wilderness, and then I can learn about it. At least using my preferred method. I do have at least one book that would cover it, which is one of the Catton books. To some extent, I do think there's something to be said that the Confederates, Robert E. Lee took multiple huge gambles at Chancellorsville, and because Joe Hooker was just practically comatose, none of them came back to bite him in the ass. Game on the Wilderness. So bear in mind, so first of all, Stigler, bring us our Game on the Wilderness. We're holding you personally responsible for any delays, because you at least know who to yell at if there are delays. I do expect to see the GBACW Game on the Wilderness sooner or later, probably more sooner than later. But there's not a ton on the Wilderness. I think it did pop up in one of the old blue and gray quads. As John C. mentions, Lee versus Grant is about that campaign, but it is an operational game and not a battle game. Same deal with Grant Takes Command. One might reasonably see Grant Takes Command as the direct successor game. Let me start that over again in case I said it wrong. One might easily see Grant Takes Command as the successor game to Lee versus Grant. And now having Lee versus Grant, although you can't see it, it's on the shelf above the camera shot. It's there with the Victory Games library. Look, now that I have Lee versus Grant, looking at that, it is closer to GCACW than I had assumed that it was. This might be, Joe Prez, this might be the game I'm thinking of rather than popping up in the one of the blue and gray campaigns. So, hey, as Albert Smith, any of you guys want to come to Buckeye Game Fest, we will welcome you with open arms. That includes you, or Dick, or Al Smith, or anybody else. And Mr. Mark Herman is here. Thanks, Mark, for coming by. And yes, bad day. Everybody agrees that Chancellorsville was a bad day. Apparently, it's a bad day for games, too, because there's not that many games on it. But Marcus is contributing to the fixing of that. I think Chancellorsville could easily make a good game. You are likely to end up with results that seem improbable historically, or I would argue that the historical result was fairly improbable. Let me put it that way. So it might be hard to manage that in a way that feels organic, but this wasn't a near miss. This like hit one of the beams in the building he was in, and the beam came down and conked him on the head. So the cannonball missed him, but the beam did not. But even prior to this, Joe was not making decisions. So this is a great example, as Ken X or Ken 10 points out, of a battle that should have some fog of war. And yet we have seen at least a couple of Chancellorsville games. There haven't really been that many where it doesn't figure in at all. So this is a pretty good segue into the topic of fog of war and limited intelligence, and limited control, and how we model those things. And I'm going to hit a couple of touchstones from things I've either played recently or have an enduring fondness for. And in Pat's case, I'm going to give him a shout out for the Hot Dry Season, which is now in the works from Snafu Store, correct me if I'm wrong about Spanish publisher. I think they're I think they're located in Spain. They've done a number of folios or Ziploc type games, and they're I keep wanting to stumble over the name. A Hot Dry Season will be their first boxed game. It is Pat's Vietnam game on Operation Attleboro. It is excellent. It does have some direct modeling of fog of war with hidden information, and that's handled in a reasonably straightforward way in one sense, and slightly less traditional in another way that I'll get to. John Stanley, thank you so much. For operational fog of war, Union armies in the Shenandoah Valley in 1862 were slow and poor to react. So I think we are talking about two separate things here, right? We, on the one hand, both of which factor into Jackson's 1862 campaign in the Valley. One of which is the lack of the Union, for example's information about Confederate movements, about Jackson's movements. Okay, you can easily turn this around and make the same argument about Lee having no idea what the Union situation looks like because Stuart was off joyriding at Gettysburg, or for the first 2 days of Gettysburg. So this works either way. So Mark says that Rebel Fury handles Chancellorsville, which is in the box, and I think it's one of the reasons why I think Rebel Fury is so attractive is because it's giving us some battles that we've very infrequently seen, including this and Spotsylvania and other stuff. So very much looking forward to that. And that ought to be coming basically any time. Now, there's the other question that John Stanley also alludes to in this post, which is the Union's movements and maneuvering is uncoordinated, sluggish, and this is a thing that happened. This happened to the Confederates, too, from time to time, by the way. This is not strictly a Union phenomenon, but it is definitely something that the Union does in the Valley campaign, is that they stumble around, they have no idea where Jackson is. So we have kind of two things happening here. We have, one, a lack of information about where the enemy actually is and in what numbers, where is the enemy's strength, okay? And that is a question that many war games have simply decided they're not going to bother with. We are not going to answer that question. There's plenty that do, to one extent or another, but those seem exceptional because they are not sort of part of the standard library of war game mechanics, right? Frank Davis says Chancellorsville 1862, which is Maurice Suckling's game from Worthington, includes a cool fog of war optional rule system. So I will just point, I have not looked at that game. I will say that it is not a member of the Civil War Brigade Battle Series, unlike their games on Shiloh, Antietam, 7 Days, and now, or any time now, Gettysburg. So just to mention that, I haven't really looked at that. Now, there is a fog of war mechanism in GCACW, which is also optional, and that is basically the quite common fog of war mechanic, which is just to have hidden forces, and then you move a force marker around on the map, and you keep the forces themselves on an off-map display. It is that simple, and there are some pretty light rules about when you can swap your actual units out for a force marker, and when you have to reveal what's under the force marker, and that is one of the things that you can do with cavalry in GCACW. So so this seems like an interesting choice. This also seems like the maybe perhaps the same rationale as we had for the gigantic primordial forest covering all of Kansas on the War Between the States maps. So there is a video. Let me catch up here real quick. Stigler says maybe since the wilderness is all woods, they decided that everything's just woods and that we're just not going to draw it. That seems very efficient, to say the least. And Joe Perez says that this uses the same system as Lee Moves North. Lee Moves North was relatively early, as I recall. It was like 72, 73. Maybe it was 74. I don't know. Lee versus North is actually a want list item for me. I'd kind of like to give it a look. I believe it's been a long time since I have watched this, but I think Gilbert Collins did a video on that. This is totally true, but remember that Fredericksburg does not exactly play out the way that Burnside had planned it to either, right? There's a whole bunch of variables there. Now, admittedly, many of those variables show up on the operational side, like, hey, where's the pontoon boats? Where's the bridges and boats and stuff that we're supposed to use to cross the river? And them not showing up, and then Burnside constantly having Lincoln a foot and a half up his ass about not attacking. So Meandering Mike points out Lee Moves North is 1972. The Wilderness Games is very early, though. It might have been even the same year. I don't know. There's not a whole lot before that. So, but clearly, Burnside not the most capable Union general on the list, okay? Nobody's going to disagree with that. But Burnside was not a total clown either. Well, I think sometimes we're a little too hard on Burnside. Let me put it that way. More so than is deserved, just based on the example of Fredericksburg. He did some smart things here and there in the war. Was not a good overall commander. There's no doubt about that, but he knew that too. So Steve O says that Fog of War could be good for face-to-face, but can be an impediment to solo play. So yes and no. I see where Steve's coming from on this, and he's right in that if you have a game that is designed for opposed play, it's not designed as a solitaire game, then including hidden information in that dynamic is going to hinder its playability for solitaire players, okay? Burnside was not on the peninsula, that's true. He was on the South Carolina Islands, as I recall. The smart alternative, I could be flippant about this, Frank, and say the smart alternative is listen to what Longstreet's telling you. And don't let Stuart just leave with all the cavalry. He didn't. That it is incorrect to say that Stuart left with all the cavalry. But he left with all the good cavalry, and Imboden's cavalry, neither Imboden nor Lee knew how to use that Imboden's cavalry. So all I'm saying is I think we do give Burnside a little extra hard time than I think is necessarily warranted. I'll even say that about McClellan to some extent. But on the other hand, you've got absolutely hapless dipshits like Fremont and John Pope and people like that. But there's Confederate examples too. I can never remember this dude's name. The Fighting Bishop. You all know who I'm talking about. The Fighting Bishop. Leonidas Polk. That's who I'm thinking of. That guy was bad. But anyway, not that I think Burnside shouldn't get criticized for Fredericksburg. He totally should. But at the same time, he was kind of put in a prep situation as much. Everybody, of course, immediately jumped on Polk, other than me. Yeah, and don't forget who's doing the mindless frontal assaults at Malvern Hill. It's not Burnside. It's not the Union. It's not McClellan. Of all things, McClellan could not be accused of performing mindless frontal assaults. It was Lee. Okay, and that is a battle that the Confederates lose. They lose more men. They lose the battle. McClellan retreats anyway because he's McClellan. What can I say? So, the Fremont, California may well be named after John C. Fremont, who had acquired quite a bit of renown as an explorer of the West, and had not every decision Fremont made was bad. There's a couple of good decisions that Fremont made. One of which, the most important of which, was to put Grant in charge. So there's that. All right, so Eric Goebel says 1914 Hell Unleashed deploys all the counters upside down to generate fog of war and plus dummy counters. So I feel like a lot of the Clash of Arms Civil War games actually do the same thing. What's it called? Civil War Campaign Series. This came up last week. That does the same thing. Everything's kept upside down. It's just got a flag on one side, so you don't know what's what. And then there's the Library of Napoleonic Battles. Now, Kevin Zucker seems to feel like you should play with the little, whatever those are called, those little stands that don't fit in the hexes. But lots of people just play with the counters upside down. We found that to be, after having completed some play of Napoleon's Last Gamble, we found playing with the counters upside down to be a giant pain in the ass. Because you need to know who belongs to what formation in order to decide who's in command and who's not. And that is, it's a real hassle. So I do see, even though they're a little small, or a little big, the hexes are a little small. The hexes are actually fine. It's the counter sleds. Thank you, Meandering Mike. Even though they're a little big and it makes the map more crowded, it's not a super dense game, so I don't think it's much of a huge deal. I could see why people would prefer to play with the counter sled. So whenever I get the 3D printer back up, I do have a model for counter sleds. So we will be at least experimenting with that. So, John Longshore says his sister's parakeet is named Fremont, which is an interesting name. Well, so this is part of the problem, but pulling off those large coordinated attacks was challenging, and that is one of the things that, say, GCACW is intended to show. So there's a fairly similar rule for march orders in Library of Napoleonic Battles, where you can basically put a formation in march order under march orders, and you'll give them a destination, and they will continue under march orders. They're considered in command. They can move every turn and all that stuff. They are considered under march orders and therefore in command until they reach their designated destination. So, Wellington will say this or that corps march to Hal or wherever, and then they'll await orders from there, right? So, all right. There is a Fremont, Ohio. I can tell you that. And there's a Fremont neighborhood in west side of Cleveland as well. All right, so there you go. Why anybody would name anything after Braxton Bragg is a mystery to me. So, yeah, that's, I think they should have changed the name of that Fort Bragg just to avoid naming a major military installation after a loser. So, like Bragg. So, anyway. So that force pool mechanism is one way that we can at least wave our hands at Fog of War. But it does vary somewhat by implementation, right? In some games, you couldn't have an empty force marker, for example, and they're basically no dummies. In other games, there is at least a possibility of dummies. And in something like GCACW, I mean, you have some information about what an enemy force looks like based on the way it moves. If it moves like cavalry, then it's probably cavalry. If it moves like infantry, then it's probably infantry. So that gives you at least some information about what you have there. Now, the extreme far end of Fog of War modeling is Kriegspiel, right? Not the Avalon Hill Kriegspiel. I will never talk about that or say anything authoritative about it other than that it's got a not good reputation. But what I mean by Kriegspiel in this case is not necessarily Kriegspiel as such. It's a refereed game that is played double blind. Now, in the space of hex and counter war games, this has generally been considered a bit of a bridge too far. It's either considered too much of a pain, or we don't want to deal with having a referee, or whatever. For some reason, this has never been a particular, and I have some sympathy for this perspective, by the way. It's just never really been a popular mechanism, right? We've got some games that kind of go all in on being double blind. Examples include NATO Division Commander from our very own distinguished guest here tonight, Mr. Mark Herman. Although, wasn't that a Dunnigan? Mark, you're going to have to correct me on this if you weren't responsible for that. I thought that was a Dunnigan design, but I could be mixing it up with the next war too. But in any event, it's an interesting game for that reason. There's also the Double Blind series of games from GDW. They did a Market Garden game, which would be an interesting place to do hidden movement. Although, in the case of Market Garden, I mean, they're coming toward Arnhem, right? So you're going to be able to infer a certain amount of information that the historical commanders didn't necessarily. You're always going to have more information than the historical commanders had, based solely on the fact that you can look stuff up, right? I can look if I'm playing the Peninsula campaign, I can look to see, approximately how many men does Lee have available, approximately how many men does McClellan have available at various points in the campaign, and I can get a sense of what's there. Unlike McClellan, who's operating with imperfect information, who thinks that there's 350,000 Confederates in Lee's army, right? I'm going to get to Atlantic Chase because I think that's a more up-to-date way to, and much more abstract way to handle some of these ideas. But Flat Top is a bit of a classic example that goes not quite all the way towards a full double blind play with a referee, because it's kind of just built into the game. But it does that with plotted movement, okay? And that is another mechanic that has never been particularly popular in war games. Eric Hansen, thanks for stopping by. Well, this happened on this kind of thing. Let's have a sip of water before we continue. To pontificate. People talk a lot about Lincoln interfering a lot with Union generals in the field. And that definitely happened, but it happened when Jefferson Davis did it too. Lincoln was never somebody that gave somebody a command because they were his buddy. Maybe a place in the cabinet, but even then, Lincoln was walking a bit of a delicate political tightrope basically the entire time, and really couldn't afford to do that. Bragg did that kind of thing all the time, and this is one reason why somebody like Braxton Bragg remained in prominent roles, or for that matter, John Bell Hood, and why, frankly, more talented Army-level commanders like Joe Johnston or PGT Beauregard got sidelined because Jefferson Davis didn't like them. So I think, although I am not necessarily the person to make this case, I think a case could be made that political appointees running armies may have done more damage to the Confederacy than it did to the Union. And the Union ended up winning, so I think that's actually a relatively easy army argument to make. All right, so Provincius Albion points out the ASL thing for this, and that is, so there's a couple of different ways in which ASL handles fog of war. And in this sense, I am specifically talking about the limited intelligence that you have about enemy forces. On the one hand, you have concealment, which is a counter that goes down and you're not allowed to inspect the stuff that's under it, okay? But you can see how big the stack is, but the concealment markers are themselves dummies. So you can see a stack of 3 counters with a concealment marker on top. Is that 3 concealment markers? Because it can be. Or is that a squad and a machine gun under 1 concealment marker? You don't know until you go find out, okay? There is also cloaking in, I think I'm getting the terminology right here, in ASL, which are hidden units at the start of play in which you write down the locations and then reveal them when you want to reveal them. So there's a lot of examples of plotted, well, I don't know about a lot, but there's a fair number of examples of games that use plotted movement. Eric Hansen points out Wooden Ships and Iron Men, Chase of the Bismarck. So Eric Goebel, remind me which Bismarck game this is. Is this the recent one from VUCA? Or is this one of the other several Bismarck games that have appeared? HIP is, I think, the terminology for that. There you go. Cloaking is different from... I am thinking of hidden units, actually, and not cloaking. Cloaking is another thing. I have no idea how cloaking in ASL works, now that that distinction has been pointed out. But it's not hidden. Movement's not hidden. Now, yeah, but you also are forced to make decisions about where you are going without information about where the other player's stuff is going. This is a different kind of cloaking. SFB also has cloaking. And there is something of a hidden information aspect in Starfleet battles as well, because everything runs off power allocation. And if you don't know what the other guy's power allocation looks like, then maybe you don't know what they are capable of. That does matter for certain classes of ships. So I point, yes and no. So, well, okay, so Winfield Scott did not go to West Point. I'm not sure I knew that. Lincoln probably isn't helping McClellan, but he also feels like he's got to sit on McClellan to get him to actually do something. Achilles, thank you so much for the support. It is much appreciated. So this will happen sooner or later. I'm talking to Mr. The communication channel between me and the International Kriegsspiel Society has been opened, and I was actually signed up for one up until a couple of weeks before it was going to happen, as I recall, and I had to back out for some reason. So I do think that will actually happen, and I encourage folks to play in a Kriegspiel just to see what that experience is like. You don't have to do it again if you hated it, but I think it will be very instructive to see how that fog of war looks, because in a Kriegspiel, fog of war looks a lot more like it does to the historical people on the ground, because people will come and say the enemy has been spotted at such and such a location, and that could be bullshit. You don't know. Was it like the whole enemy army? Was, you're given very little information by a courier, basically, and you have to make decisions based on that, and everybody else is in the same boat. So Winfield Scott did have it. I almost got a short out of this, and it didn't mature, so I'll do it now. Winfield Scott is the Pompey Magnus of the American Civil War, in that he accrued a tremendous military reputation for fighting a much weaker opponent. In Winfield Scott's case, it was, don't forget, Zachary Taylor may have had something to do with it too, although Winfield Scott gets and deserves some of the credit for the Mexican War. Maybe that's not the best way to put that, since the Mexican War was pretty ill-motivated. But I've never... So just for the record here, Matt Davidson, I've never played any of these. So Winfield Scott was not a political general. He was in charge when Lincoln took over, right? So no, he was not a political appointee. Davis did go to West Point. He actually didn't want to be president. He wanted an army command. And boy, that would have been bad for the Union, probably, because then a more competent Confederate president might have been in charge. And there's a surprising amount of political friction happening inside the Confederacy against people who just really friggin' hate Jeff Davis. So anyway. All right, so let's catch up here. We are going to do some Air Force as a fill-in game at some point soonish. So Achilles, if I haven't said this, thank you so much for the support. It is much appreciated. And I would enjoy it. I've done Kriegspiel before. I don't think it's ever going to be like my main thing, but it's such a neat experience that I will totally do it again. And it will probably happen under the auspices of the International Kriegspiel Society. All right, so Jeff Beeler points out that I think there's a lot of differences between OCS and Europa, one of which is that Europa has or OCS has an air system that actually works, as opposed to Europa's bloated and absolutely cumbersome air system. So, I'm not sure how Jim's... I haven't been watching lately just because I haven't had the time. I'm not really sure how he's doing the Kriegspiel stuff using Tabletop Simulator, but I've certainly seen him do miniatures stuff. And I just, I guess if I was going to do miniatures, doing it on Tabletop Simulator would be a good option, because then you don't have to have any miniatures. So... Jeff Taylor mentions ASL has the concept of known units, so a unit might have to move into an ambush even though you as the player know unit of present. Yeah, that's true, and it's kind of I think this is a bit of a clumsy thing about ASL, is sometimes it tries to model the same thing using multiple different ways. And this is one of those things where you have known versus unknown units, concealed units versus unconcealed units, hip units versus, cloaked units or whatever. Where we're doing an awful lot of work to cover the same thing, is we don't know where the enemies are. Frank Davis says that presidents are usually unhelpfully giving strategic advice. They've already lost the grand strategic conflict. To Lincoln's credit, at least, when it became obvious that he was going to need some understanding of military matters, he went and read a bunch of books on the subject. So he was at least trying. Now, I'll point out his West Point trivia. Go ahead and look this up. And I don't remember the exact date, but you can find this on Wikipedia. Rather famously, Robert E. Lee graduated second in his class at West Point. That's interesting. Who graduated first over Robert E. Lee? I'll tell you. Fucking nobody. That's who. The person's name, I don't even remember it because they're a nobody. They accomplished nothing of import in military matters ever again after graduating from West Point. They might have done something in the Mexican War, actually, but they were not in military service under arms during the American Civil War. So whoever beat out Robert E. Lee turned into somebody whose name is a trivia answer nowadays. All right, so Petra Pictures mentions Draco Ideas. They do the Scope games. I have never looked at this. I have heard of Draco Ideas. Maybe it's not that obvious, but I have heard of Draco Ideas. I've never owned nor played any of those games. Wow. Okay, Winfield Scott was commissioned before West Point was founded. I guess that's fair. I did not know that. Mexico City campaign was a tour de force of logistics. I am not an expert on the Mexican War. Don't ask me questions about the Mexican War. Winfield Scott was involved. A bunch of the prominent people from the American Civil War were also involved, including Lee and Grant, Longstreet, and Hancock. I think Hancock. I could be wrong about that. But lots of those points were West Point. Lots of those folks were West Pointers. There was some pushback against West Point graduates, though, in a couple of places where it was felt that there was a clique of people who were getting cherry assignments because they were West Point graduates and all their buddies were putting them in for those assignments, as opposed to, randos from elsewhere. Braxis MF, thanks for stopping by. I don't know that I read this, but this... boy, this would have been dumb. All right, so John Stanley, thank you so much for the support again, much appreciated. He says, for Fog of War, look at PTO night surface naval battles. In 1942, the U.S. Navy by accident killed an U.S. Admiral at Guadalcanal. So are we talking about the game PTO or just the Pacific Theater in general here? Because I've got the game PTO, but not advanced PTO, because that was a literal bridge too far. So I have no comment about this, John C. I do not know. Air Force seems very easy to play. This is how friggin' old Winfield Scott was during the American Civil War, by the way. He was also like 6'4" and weighed about 350 pounds and was like too large to ride a horse and could only reasonably, this is, in the American Civil War, could only reasonably work for a couple hours at a time because he was that physically infirm. So frankly, keeping Scott on as a military advisor is probably not a terrible idea, because one can make the case that the Anaconda Plan is responsible for the overall long-term Union victory, maybe. He certainly should not have been the lead general at that point. Even giving it to McClellan is a smarter idea than that at that point. So he was very old, very infirm, very large. So, yes, esteemed veteran, but not in great shape by 1861. So Mark Herman says, when he researched his Civil War situations, the conversations from Lincoln and others would be a general move, not where he was going. I mean, a lot of this, so I have not conducted anything resembling the amount of research that I assume Mark has done. So just caveat there. But some of the correspondence, a lot of the correspondence that I'm seeing from Lincoln writing to generals leading armies in the field is not really giving them specific instructions about what they must do. It is exhorting them to get friggin' moving for huge portions of that conflict. So there's that. And certainly somebody like McClellan wasn't given Lincoln or the War Department or anybody any real information about, an example is the preparation for the Peninsula Campaign, where Lincoln finds out that half the people that really GMT, fuck. All right, so we've got 3s with 4s on the back. Cool. We've got 3s with 6s on the back. Or are they 9s? No one knows. Anyway. All right, so Wolfdog mentions Fog of War and SPI's War of the Ring. Hobbit counters very visible on the map. Just a search dice roll necessary. Yeah, and, to some extent, I think this is completely fine. I'm only putting the 3s with the 4s on the back in here. I'll pull counters out of another game if necessary. So, I assume Charles Mason is the guy that graduated ahead of Robert E. Lee at this point, by the way. Yes, this is correct. As did Harry Heath and George Pickett. There were famously 3 of these goats on the field at Gettysburg. Custer was at Gettysburg. So, and I think we're talking, John C's looked up some information on this Charles Mason individual here. No, Pickett was also last in his class, but so was Custer and so was Harry Heath. No, this just doesn't make sense based on. Oh, this would have been a funny zinger had it been true, but I mean, this is unlikely just based on the age of the two men, right? By modern standards, Lee was probably not that old. I want to say he was in his late 50s in 1862. Something like that. This David Imperato, this joke is 10 times funnier if you're from Cleveland, I assure you. All right, so Frank Davis says that all World War II and earlier night naval engagements were troubled by friendly fire and friendly ship collisions, not to mention Japanese aircraft that attempted to land on enemy carriers. That's got to be a hilarious moment. Hey, planes coming into plan. Holy shit, it's Japanese. Oops. Anyway, so Frank has done a lot more legwork as far as research and on the topic of naval stuff than I have. However, what I can also say, just as another example of this, is the situation of the night airdrop in Sicily in July of 1943, which was not a clean drop. Okay, there was a lot of friendly fire. The drop was really messy. So this like a lack of information and coordination strikes once again. And friendly fire is something that I've seen it come up in ASL with residual fire. But normally you avoid situations that are going to put your troops in a residual fire hex, right? So you're going to try to avoid that. 1786. Almost older than the Constitution, by the way. No, I think that's actually older. When was the Constitution? Was after 1786, I can tell you that. So, all right. So, all right. Panzerkraftwagen 5 mentions Avalon Hill's Luftwaffe. I've never played that, so I can't comment on that. Now, the thing with a solitaire game, though, is that one can just build the hidden information into the solitaire game. So, for example, in the Hunters, one can say, hey, the composition of the convoy we've been tailing is hidden information. And it's to you, it is. And you have to imagine that in the game universe, that information is there and you just don't know it. But in fact, the game is generating that information as it is needed. So on-demand production of hidden information. And that is one of the ways that, to touch on the earlier comment, that hidden information makes solitaire play harder. That's true in games that aren't designed for solitaire play. In games that are designed for solitaire play, you just build it right into the model, right? If you're playing, the example in my head is actually Night Witches, believe it or not. You don't know what the hell's you're in the German-held hexes that you're flying over. Now, nobody's played Night Witches yet, but I predict that it's going to be. I think it's pretty neat. It's the co-designed by David Thompson and Liz Davidson. It is coming out from Fort Circle Games. That might happen this year. I don't have any inside information that it is, but I think it's probably coming out this year. I could, of course, ask either David or Liz, and they'd probably tell me if that information is available, or Kevin for that matter, and they'd probably tell me if that information is available, but I have not actually inquired. I just know that I will acquire a copy when it becomes available. And it is on an interesting topic. Roy Musselman is learning GBACW on Death Valley so he can play Gringos. Cool. So cool that you're going to do Gringos, but that is one that I have but have not played. And it's not, like a priority to play Gringos, right? I mean, I'd rather play Red Badge Courage. Just because it's Civil War and not Mexican War. I'm just more interested in the topic. Marty Sample mentions Tokyo Express has an excellent solo system for the solo naval battles in the slot. Well, so I'd be curious to know how well Tokyo Express, which is a solitaire game, is doing at modeling that solo night action specifically. I'd be curious to see that. Now, this is another one that I have and have never played. So I thought it was the next day, but that might have been the day that Lee showed up at the army too. So Johnston and Davis had a not great relationship, but it was also a little hot and cold. Any good books focused? So Frank asked about good books focused on Civil War cavalry operations. Damn it. I'm gonna have to look this up, Frank, because I actually might have. I could tell you the book I've got or two. They're special. So we'll look that up in a second. I can give you at least names. I can't promise that they're any good. I have in digital format 87 books on the American Civil War. I've got at least one book on the cavalry specifically, and it is not coming up. There's definitely some books on forest, and here's a couple of books on the wilderness. There's Brandy Station, Battle of Brandy Station, which is a big cavalry battle. So this is, let's see here. Yeah, that's not going to do it. Frank, remind me to get back to you on that. I might be able to give you at least a breadcrumb on that. All right. So Andrew Detterer mentions Tokyo Express and CV. So CV was not from Victory Games. I think you're thinking of... They're all John Southard games. CV... I think we're thinking of Carrier. There is a game called CV, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the Midway... is a game about Midway, basically using the flat top system that some other publisher did. I want to say it was... we're not having a great memory day today, that's for sure. Yaquinto, I want to say that. John C. mentions The Late Unpleasantness, which is a game that Compass did a couple of years ago. There's a possibility that Davis could come in for Johnston. I think that's damn unlikely, because I don't think the other people in the Confederate government would sit still for that, unless it was just like for an hour until Lee gets there. That maybe. This is definitely true. Stigler says, by the Civil War, the role of cavalry was changing a lot. The days of... So, yeah, there's not a lot. I won't say there are zero examples of cavalry charges that actually do something in the Civil War, but it's certainly not like the Napoleonic... neither cavalry nor artillery, nor, for that matter, infantry, are used identically to how they were used in the Napoleonic period. Massed fire is far more effective in the American Civil War period than it was in the Napoleonic period, because the weapons were better, and after a while there was better training. All right, so Stigler says cavalry was used for raids, control of road junctures on the wings of an army, recon scouting, raids for supplies, raids to disrupt supply lines or lines of communication, raids to tear up rail lines, for example. That happened a lot. Raids to seize black people and drag them back to the South to be slaves for the first time in some cases. Those were all things that occurred. So... yeah, this is true. I imagine this is true generally of cavalry operations, to be honest about it. But yeah, it was pretty hard on the horses. And this was a huge disincentive for Southern cavalry, because they, at least at the beginning, they provided their own horses. The cavalry troopers usually brought their own horses. All right, so Ijan Tichy mentions Stephen Z. Starr has a few detailed volumes on the subject of Union cavalry. Now, Union cavalry is a pretty interesting question. I guess we're talking about Civil War cavalry, which is one of the weapons against fog of war, I suppose. But the Union's cavalry specifically evolves a lot during the American Civil War. It's no secret. One is often presented with this idea that the Confederate Army is super professional, more or less from the get-go, and they have really good officers, more or less from the get-go, and the Union takes a long time to catch up. That is a reductivist position that I think is a lot less true for the Union Army as a whole, but it is, I think, absolutely true for the Union for the cavalry situation. Remember that the Union didn't start calling up soldiers. The Union Army is about 15 or 16,000 people in 1861, and they don't start calling up soldiers until just shortly after Fort Sumter. Okay, so, and most of those 15 or 16,000 are not stationed along the Virginia border, along the Potomac. They're stationed out west. Okay, basically from day one of secession, the southern states start recruiting militias. So that there is a southern head start in terms of manpower on the field under arms. Arms, in some cases, meant daddy's shotgun, or really old breech-loading flintlocks or whatever that they dug out of an attic. So, you know, there's some upsides and downsides to that. Lincoln was known, Andrew Atkin, to stay overnight at the War Department's telegraph office. Remember, Lee at this point is does not have a great reputation. Okay, Lee is basically the primary military advisor to Jeff Davis, and he is given sort of a couple of wishy-washy assignments in that role, where he gets sent up to West Virginia, what's now West Virginia, but he's not really in charge. At that point, so he's like only making suggestions to the actual commanders on the field. Really sloppy command structure at that point. I am delighted that GCB ACW counters now have lines under 6s and 9s. So that is great. Thank you for that innovation, Stigler. We will also credit you when the GC ACW folks do something good. Did we? What the shit? All right. Well, now that the chat on the side will work again. I closed it stupidly. All right. All right. So, British Albion says that cavalry during the ACW were essentially mounted infantry. Sometimes they fought as mounted infantry, in fact. They were expected to ride. So this is definitely something that does happen. There's some truth to this. There's also actual cavalry battles that happened on horseback, too. So this trend is not perfect for the duration of the American Civil War, but it does happen. Marty mentions the Ares War of the Ring game, which I've played, but it's been a long time, and I don't know that I can really comment on it intelligently at this time. Mark Herman says that Custer was a very good cavalry commander. He was a good cavalry commander, actually. That's fairly true. In the situation that he was in the Civil War, he came out of that with a pretty good reputation. He was just bad at handling other matters, as it turned out, as he found out to his chagrin. Ken 10 says, late 50s is young. I certainly agree. I'm still just a youth at this point. MacArthur, okay, but he was also an egomaniac. And that is, so 55 in 1862, but 55 is old for the American Civil War. I mean, look at him. He looks old, right? Japanese aircraft landing. This has got to be, I'd love to read this particular anecdote. Let me put it that way. So I agree with this, and the question, Frank, is at the scale you're looking at, I could see figuring something out for a cavalry raid. Recon less so, but I'm reluctant to commit any more than that without knowing more about how it actually works. I've seen a couple of the things, but I don't know enough yet. So Jeff Beeler points out that Mason and Lee also still the two highest graduation point scores in the history of West Point. The third highest is Dugout Doug MacArthur. They taught him how to hide in the dugout, a lesson he learned well. Mark Herman says that the game should have coordination die rolls for airstrikes, as Pacific War does. I will point that out. And the difference is substantial if your airstrike happens at uncoordinated. All right, we now have 1789. All right, I think this is when I asked when the Constitution got signed, because that sounds approximately correct. All right. I feel like this sometimes, too. I feel like I've gotten away with aging very, very well for the most part. But then, now it's like I come up with some kind of new and hitherto unknown malady every 6 months or so. So, and spend more time sick. There was a point. I remember this, and I can calculate this because and you'll see why when I say it. I got a job at some point this was approximately 2010. Yeah, it's 2009, something like that. I didn't call off sick for 4 years at that job. Not doing quite as well nowadays, let me put it that way. I've spent some of the last weekend in an uncomfortable state. Let me put it that way. Anyway, this is true. Yes, I guess I hadn't thought of it in quite that logical a manner. Marty Sample says that some early U.S. admirals in World War II didn't trust radar, while others embraced it and performed well once they got the hang of it. I mean, this kind of thing that's like, oh, that's not traditional, we can't do it that way, is not uncommon at all. It's dumb, but it's not uncommon. Excellent, Mark. I didn't order a new copy of the game, but I did order the incredibly nice looking new box, because I was like, I've actually got the whole game in a 2-inch box with the cards and everything, thanks to the magic of 3D printing. However, it would be nice to have a 3-inch box, and that 3-inch box looks awesome. So I ordered the box. And at some point, that will be showing up. All right. And yes, Mark, we are, in fact, jealous. So there's that. Well, this is true, but remember that it's like 25 miles away, right? It's not. Actually, from Seven Pines, when Johnston gets hurt, that's more like 8 or 12 miles away from Richmond. It's right there, so it's not like they were far away. So just to clarify, I don't think Stigler's saying this, but just to clarify that. All right, we're trying to catch up here. Cavalry of the Heartland. Now, I do have the Army of the Heartland game, which is a John Prados game. That is the Civil War. I think it's called the Civil War Campaign series, but it's confusingly named too similarly to a couple of other things. And consequently, I'm not 100% sure if I'm getting the name right, but that's that John Prados series. There's like 3 or 4 games in the series. One of which is Army of the Heartland. One of which is Campaigns of Robert E. Lee, which I also have, and which has the thinnest counters I have ever seen in a game that actually has mounted counters. And both of those are use that method I remarked on earlier, which is just to keep all the enemy forces upside down. There is I think the motivation here is a little bit different, but I think the de facto effect works out to be about the same. If you think about the sort of formation cards that a lot of people prefer to use for BCS, where you have a card for each formation, whether it's a division or regiment or whatever it is, and you keep a bunch of the information relevant to that formation off the map on this little card. The Kevin Zucker Campaigns of Napoleon system, those cards in BCS are not motivated by Fog of War. But the mechanism in the Kevin Zucker Campaigns of Napoleon series is motivated by Fog of War. You may see, hey, there's Marat or whoever, and not necessarily know how much manpower they have with them. Now, this is a very simple Fog of War mechanism, as Eric Goebel points out. There, Valkyrie does this too. This is the OCS Fog of War mechanic. Don't inspect the other side's stacks. That's it. I feel like that is a very sort of superficial way to handle Fog of War. I think it's not really doing what if you care about modeling Fog of War. I don't think you'll be satisfied with that mechanic. Let me put it that way. However, I think having played rather a lot of OCS at this point, I think a lot of people might end up being some mother 4s on the back of 5s. What the? Killing me here, GMT. Killing me. Anyway. All right, we checked it on the sheet. I am incredibly OCD about that. And yes, this aggravates me a great deal in ASL, by the way, just to say that publicly. Let's put that over there. Anyway, so Der Weltkrieg has a very similar thing, and the stacking in Der Weltkrieg can be pretty high. I think it's 6 cores in a... If I remember this correctly, I think it's 6 cores in a hex. That's a lot. So, a bunch of people talking about CV is from Yaquinto, and it's Midway. But like I said, it's basically the flat top system, which means I'd probably like a copy. Then again, there's a lot of variants for flat top anyway. You don't necessarily need to run that down. All right, so... Ooh. So... Cavalry raids... it can happen in GCACW. I could tell you that. That is, however, an operational game, so bear in mind that you're making a statement about scale in GCACW. There is an actual mechanical screening effect. So Cavalry have a special mode of retreat in GCACW called, creatively enough, a cavalry retreat. And basically, whenever anybody enters their zone of control or activates in their zone of control, they have the option at that moment to declare a cavalry retreat. And they roll, and according to the results of the roll, the opposing player activating units may lose a number of movement points as they... clear out the cavalry screen. They may, 1 in 6 chance, also destroy themselves. So remember that, or I should say lose a manpower, but in a number of GCACW games, you don't really see cavalry with more than 1 manpower. That's not the hard limit. I think the hard limit is normally 2, but that may vary by campaign. So there's that. Joe Menta mentions Volko's Blackbeard game under development at Fort Circle. Is that a Solitaire game? I'd have to remember, because there's been a couple of different trajectories on Hunt for Blackbeard, where I know Volko was working on it for GMT, and that didn't work out, and now it's with Fort Circle, and it sounds like he's made some changes. So remind me. Carrier is Victory Games. It does use at least a similar system as Tokyo Express, I am given to understand. But I've never owned Carrier, and I have Tokyo Express, but haven't really even looked at it. GWG Gaming with Garavalia, thanks for stopping by. No squares in American Civil War. Charles Roberts would disagree. The original Gettysburg definitely has squares. And then they went to hexes, and then they inexplicably went back to squares. I don't know why. Blackbeard's Volvo. There you go. Well, you got raids all over the place in the American Civil War. The Confederate cavalry raids tended to have been significantly more romanticized than their Union equivalents. And yes, the Union did participate in cavalry raiding. And in fact, in Grant's Vicksburg campaign, there's at least one really, really important Union cavalry raid. But a lot of noise gets made about Mosby and Forrest and Morgan and a variety of other very good Confederate cavalry commanders that went on famous raids. So we've got a number of recommendations here for Civil War cavalry action. So John Stanley mentions newer biographies of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Those Damn Horse Soldiers, says John Clark, by George Walsh, which he hasn't read yet. Mike Reed mentions Pick and Custer were goats at West Point. I mean, this definitely happened. It famously happens on day 1 at Gettysburg, right? Everybody knows about Buford and his dismounted cavalry. But this happened elsewhere as well. So, and there we go with Manders, cavalry in the Gettysburg campaign. This may be the one that I have, actually, but I couldn't find it, and I didn't want to derailed the show looking for it for too long, actually. Achilles mentions that American cavalry were always dragoons. I will point out that the term dragoon itself was not absolutely fixed during the entire time it was used. So there's a number of things going on with McClellan's intel, and I guess we're talking about intel, so McClellan's intelligence failures are valid stomping grounds here. On the one hand, you've got Pinkerton. The actual Alan Pinkerton is feeding McClellan information. He is McClellan's chief intelligence operative. And there's no question that Pinkerton fed McClellan some bullshit, okay? At the time, now remember, consider the time frame here. You got war starts in 1861, 1862 happens. By the end of 1862, McClellan is no longer in charge of anything except his own presidential. Does that happen in 1862? Maybe. So anyway, close to the beginning of somebody remind me what the exact timing of Fredericksburg is, because it's shortly before Fredericksburg that McClellan gets sacked. McClellan's not in charge of anything after that. So you've got the early war Union cavalry, where the Union cavalry was just like these little detachments that were assigned to other units. They didn't have like discrete cavalry units like the Confederates did this early in the war. The Union would eventually reorganize its cavalry more along the lines that the Confederacy was using, where there might be some independent cavalry too, or like a corps cavalry, but there would also be a cavalry formation, a cavalry corps, cavalry division led by somebody like Forrest or Stewart or somebody like that knew what they were doing. And this is true, and I do think at a I'm saying superficial because what's superficial here is my understanding of the topic. Based on my superficial understanding, it does feel like 1863 is where, maybe very late 1862, is where Union cavalry starts to become more competitive. Let's put it that way. All right, Mike Reed says Dave Powell, who's done a bunch of great books on Chickamauga. Great, not only is Dave Powell, who has also designed wargames, has probably the definitive work on the Chickamauga campaign in particular. I think this is fair, actually. Stigler, am I nuts, or is all the Gettysburg parts of Rebel Sabers going to be in the new 3-Dog? I think so. I just saw this the other day, actually. Mr. Lincoln's T-mails. How Lincoln is using the relatively new technology of the telegraph. So let's say I am slightly behind on super chats here, so let's get caught up on that. John Stanley, Union artillery, good from the start of the war. This is true, except when they lost it, like at First Manassas. And Alistair Logie, thanks so much for the support. All the support is much appreciated. Oh no, this is absolutely true. It was like a known person, I forget, but it's the same type of deal where it's like a much more famous event happened there, and it was what Lincoln said for 2 minutes. The other guy got up and talked for like 2.5 hours or something like that. Much use of the saber during the American Civil War, a little bit, yeah, but again, the role of cavalry, which has already been pointed out, had already changed dramatically and was continuing to change as that conflict evolved. This is great, actually. Who'd we ask about how well McClellan did at West Point? MacArthur. Neil Bedke points out that Custer served well at Gettysburg, which is absolutely true. Folks, we are at 9:19, and so we are more than halfway through the show. So I'm going to try to catch up on the chat while we hear from our intrepid sponsors at Noble Knight Games. Come on, you stupid machine. There we go. Here is Noble Knight. Take it away.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at. Complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world, just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right, Eric Goebel drinks Irish whiskey to fix his health problems. I agree. I prefer Scotch, but, I could see it totally worked. GWG Gaming with Garavalia. No, this is not the case. And in fact, Meade, who had literally just been placed in charge of the Army of the Potomac mere days before Gettysburg, got a lot of heat from Lincoln about not aggressively enough pursuit of the of Lee's retreating Confederate army. The Union Army was pretty badly mauled, too. There's a number of factors that went into that, though. One of which is that the Union Army's fairly beat up after Gettysburg as well. Another which is the giant rainstorm that happens on the 3rd. That mucks up the roads, which affects Lee as well, obviously. I have listened to a little bit of this. There's like 600 episodes of this podcast, so it's going to be a long time before I get caught up to it. And there's so much there that I may pick and choose what I listen to rather than trying to listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. I am listening to a podcast called The Civil War and Reconstruction. And it's pretty good, and it goes into good detail, but of course it's a podcast, so you're missing the benefit of maps and that kind of stuff. Although you can look that stuff up on your own, and they've got a website and all that jazz. So, all right, so The Frog of War, that's actually a great name for a game. All right, Ken X says he used to get 3 or 4 colds a year. They started wearing a mask. He's only caught a cold once or twice in the last 4 years. So this is a thing. This is not what this show's about. But I guess I'll mention that the flu instances of the flu during the COVID pandemic went way, 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 way down because more people were wearing masks. So masks do stuff. Whether you want to wear it or not is up to you. Just don't act like a child about it. Anyway, Jack Rady's Duel for Kharkov has off-map holding boxes, powered counters, hidden counter faces, playing this solo, and it's been a great alternating the Soviet and German forces. So Jack Rady is I think a great wargame designer in addition to being a renowned expert on this particular topic. So I would be very curious how many. I don't think I have any of Jack Rady's games. Probably should fix that, but I don't know specifically about what to get, other than maybe Coruscant Pocket. But there's a bunch of good ones. There's Duel for Kharkov and To the Wolf's Lair and a couple other things. So, Mike Reed says it may be popular to dogpile on MacArthur, but his contributions to the U.S. military greatly outweigh his drawbacks. Well, he was not incompetent, I'll give you that, but, remember that the last cavalry saber, or the last sword issued by the U.S. Army was actually designed by Patton, which I found like an interesting piece of trivia. So Kings and Generals is in their 119th weekly episode of the Pacific War by week. They're on the invasion of the Admiralty Islands. That's a good channel, but I can't keep up with that, to be honest. All right. I've never played Mike Reed. I've never played Upfront. At some point that will change because I've got friends who are big fans of Upfront, so I am positive I will get to play it at some point. We're trying to catch up here. Not entirely successful. Andrew Atkins says Antietam is his favorite Civil War battle. Antietam's an interesting battle. It's tricky to do games on Antietam because of the numerical situation that folks find themselves in. If everybody's just got the ability to have everybody go where they want to go, and this is the other dimension that comes in. It's not really fog of war at this point, but it is not entirely deterministic command control, that you don't necessarily have complete control over what your guys are doing. One needs that for Antietam specifically, because otherwise McClellan just sends everybody in and overwhelms Lee, and that's that. And that's a problem in Antietam games. Or at least some Antietam games. Now, something like the Line of Battle Antietam game, None But Heroes. Shout out to John from Half-Ass Gaming. That is how I got my copy. We worked out an amicable trade. And he got what he wanted, and I got what I wanted, and everybody was happy at the end. So thank you, John. Anyway. All right. Oh, look at that. It's a disease. If it is a disease, then you can call me Typhoid Gary. That's what I'm saying. That's what I was calling myself after COVID bout number 5. Mike Reed mentions that CV was Craig Taylor's refinement of Flat Top. This is true. It's post-Flat Top. Before Alan Moon got all fiddly with the AH version with the oddest color choices for the counters. There are some changes between the Battle Line and Avalon Hill versions of Flat Top. I don't know that those are more. I guess I'll say it this way. I didn't know those were more than cosmetic, but some of the cosmetic stuff has a detectable impact on gameplay, which is a little annoying. So we got to the Noble Knight video. I usually get to it in, say, the middle 20 minutes of the show. Let's put it that way. So I'm hearing really good things about Carrier Battles Philippine Sea from John Southard. And unfortunately, I'd have picked it up at Compass Expo. I was poised to pick it up at Compass Expo, but by Compass Expo, it had sold out. So I was not able to do that. I may well pick that out. I appreciate the folks who did remind me to not forget the Noble Knight video. Folks, I gotta say how awesome it is that the folks watching here made sure that they got to see the ad. So thank you for the reminder. Grierson's Raid. I should check that out. So yeah, this is a weird artifact of early Avalon Hill where they started with squares and they were called squares, but even after they made them hexagons, they kept calling them squares for a while. So, Andrew Atkin, we love Noble Knight, your sponsor/affiliate. I am their affiliate. They are not my affiliate, but they are my sponsor. So thank you, Noble Knight. So, Noble Knight, you say? Who are they? Strange newcomers, I see. So, yeah, that's going very well, as far as I can tell from the performance of the affiliate link. Let's put it that way. So, did we get to... Yeah, okay, we got that. So, John Mogg says, in line of battle, mounted cavalry and open order units screen moving units by making them stop to shoot at them. They then retreat 2 hexes. I think... So, the cavalry retreat from GCACW kind of works that way, too. But there's no shooting happening. The way it works is you'll declare the cavalry retreat. You'll roll a d6. If you roll a 1 on the d6, the cavalry unit loses 1 manpower. If you had more than 1, great. If you only had 1, then that kills the unit. And then you divide the number, and there are some DRMs to this roll. You divide that adjusted DR, and only on a natural 1 do you lose the manpower. So you make some DRMs to that roll, and then you cut the adjusted roll in half, and that is the number of movement points that the triggering unit loses. And, so it can lose half its movement. It's not that uncommon. So, excellent. So, Stigler clarifies that the East Cavalry Field will be in 3-Dog Deluxe, but not as far as he knows any of the other cavalry battles from Rebel Sabers. I'd like to see those. I don't know what else is in Rebel Sabers, though. The interesting thing for me was the East Cavalry Field material. So make sure these are sensibly arranged. Other folks might have a different opinion on what's interesting and what's not, and that's fine. But I was more interested in Rebel Sabers for the East Cavalry Field stuff. And now that we're going to get a new edition of 3-Dog that contains that material, I got no reason to run down Rebel Sabers. I think I got what is probably the last Spitzer game that I feel like I need. And need is a term that is being used in the loosest possible sense here. The game I'm talking about is Julius Caesar. Now, this was a game that was in development it's a Richard Berg design. It was in development at SPI. And it later got published by TSR in what sounds like a significantly changed version. But I was curious enough about it, and frankly, it was cheap. So I bought it from our good friends at Noble Knight Games. So, would be worth checking if you're into this. Drive-Thru may have a sale on an upfront bundle right now. Well, I mean, this would not be shocking, would it? I mean, this would not be shocking. All right, so there you go. So McClellan is, I knew it was something like that, late 1862. So, and then Fredericksburg, Burnside's in charge. Burnside's in charge for a little while, so I don't forget what the exact timing is, but Tabletop's Edge, Doug, thanks for stopping by. Really? Well, you got my email. Email me and we can talk about this. So, Black Sea Black Death is another Jack Rady classic. And Mike Reed points out the size of the stacks in Rady's Coruscant Pocket or Fog of War in itself. Now, I did an unboxing of Coruscant Pocket 2, and it is a big package. I gotta say, I wasn't impressed. If you watch the unboxing, you'll get a sense of this. I wasn't super thrilled with the physical graphics of it, let's put it that way. The counters are basically fine, although the gutters are really small, and some people might have registration problems. But the map is the same map as the 1978 or whatever it was map. So, and I think there's reasons for that, but those reasons are speculative. All right, so Austin Reidiger says, Here Come the Rebels is awesome for Antietam because it is extremely hard to get the Union Corps in a decently fresh state to actually attack. Terrain is terrible. Yeah, and that's, but it's an operational game and not a battle game, right? And I'll agree with this statement completely, but the caveat is it's an operational game and not a battle game. Redver's Reverse. I don't know anything about that. I've heard of it. I know it's a Legion Wargames title. I don't really know much else about it. I got to peek in the warehouse too when we were there, and it's something else. It's big warehouse, right? Gleam of Battle 2. I'm going to be damn disappointed, Stigler, if this is actually called Gleam of Battle 2, because that is a lame title. And I assume you mean Gleam of Bayonets too, because Gleam of Bayonets is actually a good title. I like that title. So this is actually true. The curriculum at West Point was very engineering focused, and I only know that because of some biographies I read. So, all right. Thank God it's not called Gleam of Battle. That's a super dorky station. Okay, so this is interesting. Trevilian Station. Thank you, Matt Davidson, for this clarification. Trevilian Station, Brandy Station, Kelly's Ford, and Low Dutch Road. Brandy Station is really the only one of those I know anything about, and not that much in that case, to be honest. I've heard of Kelly's Ford and Trevilian Station. Low Dutch Road, not really ringing a bell. So we might examine the, let's call it new, approach to Fog of War as seen in, for example, Jeremy White's Atlantic Chase. Okay. Now, the way that Atlantic Chase handles Fog of War is that your units, so it's about the early Atlantic War, okay? Bear that in mind. It's like, but before like the convoy system really takes off, and in the rather brief reign of surface raiders, okay? So the way it works. I'm probably not going to do a very good job of explaining this, but your naval units do not have a specified position. Instead, you declare and place on the map a trajectory, which is a line of little wooden sticks that represents the trajectory of that particular fleet. And then there are mechanisms to allow you to search along that trajectory and then pin the enemy fleet down somewhere along that trajectory. It's a very interesting mechanic. I do think it kind of only works because of the pretty tight focus of the game's topic. But that doesn't necessarily mean you couldn't make changes to it to make it work in a broader context either. So there's that. So that's an approach to Fog of War that kind of builds in the uncertainty without necessarily having hidden information. There kind of is, again, it's kind of like the Hunters, right? There kind of is hidden information, but it is hidden in the game system, and you are making a determination assisted by die rolls of what that information actually looks like and exactly when it is revealed. So it's an interesting take. And Frank's got some very intriguing sounding things coming up with Divine Wind as well, which I haven't seen all that much on, other than to say that I forget who the artist was on that, but the materials look really, really nice. So there's that. Interesting. So I think it might be easy to make too much of this statement, but bear in mind that both Lee and Napoleon are trained as artillerists. So bear that in mind. So in any case, we are having a very nice night here in Northeast Ohio. So CDGs, so for one thing, there's like the term CDG encompasses a family of mechanics, all of which use cards, obviously, but also there's not like a single CDG mechanism. Now, if we talk about, and this is how I normally put this, if we talk about the Mark Herman classic CDG mechanism, which is the same mechanism that we see, the archetypical game for this to me is For the People, but it's the same basic idea in, say, Empire of the Sun, right? But it's also the same basic idea in Paths of Glory with a number of additional wrinkles that Ted Racer put on top of it. So, as Mark himself points out here, that is an element, but one can also end up with folks feeling like the game feels insufficiently organic because of the way the cards are structured. One of the common complaints about a game like For the People is that, hey, well, I got it's 1861, I got the New York City Draft Riots card. I'm using this as a completely made-up example, by the way. Operation Ichigo happens in 1941, for example, in Empire of the Sun, where there'll be like the historically used name of some initiative or operation or battle plan or whatever it is, that comes in a time period that doesn't make sense based on all the context that you might know from knowing more about that operation, right? And this is kind of like one of those experienced wargamer problems. This is if you don't know anything about the Pacific War, that's not going to probably bother you. If you don't know much about the Civil War, that's probably not going to bother you. For the People gets around. Am I remembering this correctly? I think I am. I think For the People, I'm going to use an example that I'm on surer ground with here. Washington's War, so By the People. you gets around this by just having like campaign cards that are worth X number of points, and they are not tied even superficially to any specific historical operation. Brant, how's it going at Gamma Expo? By the way, I am slightly jealous. The Gamma Expo show is not a public-facing convention. It is an industry trade show held by Gamma to justify their own existence, presumably. And it is now it used to be in Vegas. Then it was in Reno for a while, and now it's in Louisville, of all places. So I think this criticism is misplaced. I think there's a layer of abstraction over the cards by just the fact that the cards are there, that there is a card mechanism in this game. There's an implied layer of abstraction there that I think that complaint ignores. You are intended to get the sense of that operation or event or whatever it is, without necessarily it happening in exactly the same manner than it did historically. But that is a thing that people complain about. I think it's I think it's not a well-founded complaint. Let me put it that way. There's other things that one might say about CDGs, however. And certainly, it is hidden information. There are cards, and you have cards, and then the other person has cards, and you may or may not know what the cards the other person has. Some games will give you ways to find out what the other player has, and other games will not. And I don't know that I have a particularly strong preference either way. We're definitely going to need more of some of these counters, but that's okay. I've got the whole series. I always pull extras out of one of the other games that I know to be punched, like Three Dog and actually it'd be nice to have the ones with the 6s and the 9s underlined as well. So, but one of the other things that the card-driven game does is it forces you to make decisions about what's important for you to accomplish, right? And that's I'll once again, and I've said this a number of times before. I'll stop short of saying that this is an absolute requirement, but I strongly prefer some kind of constraint upon player activity in any war game at this point. Some kind of constraint. Now, that constraint can take a lot of different forms. And, if you're playing Third Reich or something like that, well, you're limited by your production, right? I didn't get the chance to make these units. In something like GCACW, where there's a significant and additional random factor, where I don't know if these guys are going to get to move, or how effectively they're going to move. Or in BCS, hey, I might snake eyes that snafu roll and get nothing, instead of even a partial activation where I could move a little bit. There's a little extra granularity in GCACW for that. This is fairly true. I found McClellan to be absurdly frustrating in War Between the States, by the way, because his command rating in War Between the States is a 1. Okay? And so the way movement works in War Between the States is it's totally conventional. You have movement points. You spend the movement points to move through hexes. Okay, you all know that. But at the beginning of a turn, you will have a set number of commands that you can issue directly to leaders. Okay, that number is a random determination off of a chit pull. And early in the war, and that pool evolves as the game goes on. It's an interesting mechanic, and I think it affects one of my criticisms of War Between the States, which is just the tempo. So you might have, as the Union, for example, you might have 20 leaders that you really want to move. Okay, that's great. But you might get 3 or 5 or something like that commands. Now you can issue those commands to individual leaders and then they move. Everybody else you can roll against their command rating to see if they move or not. McClellan's a 1, so it's very hard to get him to move. This by itself, I didn't have a huge problem with. However, In addition to requiring a command check in order to move, you must also pass a command check in order to actually fight a battle. Which means that McClellan, to fight a battle, he has to roll 1 on a d6 twice. Even if he gets a direct command, that only affects the movement check. It doesn't affect the battle check that will happen later in the phase. So you can't use those command points for that. Now, I'm willing to be corrected on anything I say here, but that's my recollection. And that I thought that created significant tempo problems. In aggregate, you got a result that looked reasonable, right? You got a timid McClellan doesn't do very much. That was pretty well reflected. But he would occasionally, you'll get a direct command and you'll be able to move him, or he'll get lucky on a 1 to 6 chance. So Stigler hopes that Greg Laubach's reboot. I'm sure I have pretty high faith in the current team that Dick has put together to work on a GBACW, personally. Andrew Atkin asks, what do we think of Western Approaches for a Battle of the Atlantic game? Are we talking about Western Approaches as a title, or basing a game about the actual Western Approaches group that actually wargamed the Battle of the Atlantic out? Because I think either one of those things sounds fairly interesting. I'd love somebody to reconstruct that Western Approaches thing that they did during the war and write it up as an article, or whatever. Maybe even produce it as a game. I think that might be really neat. Might not be my thing, but maybe. But you know what? A lot of titles don't. I mean, even this affects even me, right? Fire in the Lake, for example, is a pretty famous book about the Vietnam War that I personally had never heard of prior to learning that there's a game called Fire in the Lake, right? I didn't know that. Same deal with the Dark Valley. The same thing is also true of a lot of Civil War titles, by the way. It's just that I learned that those were named after books decades ago and not in the last 10 years. So, stuff like all those books named after Bruce Catton books, for example. All those games. Terrible Swift Sword is one. This Hallowed Ground is one. There are other examples. Grant Takes Command is one. There's a whole bunch of examples of that. So, Bayonet Brandt says they have redone the Western Approaches Tactical Unit at an event at Connections UK. I remember a seminar at Connections about it, which was absolutely fascinating, by the way. Bring that to the wargaming world, Brant. Get on that. This is something that you are very well positioned to do, straddling as you do both professional and hobby sides of wargaming. Landscape Turned Red. That's another one. That's Stephen Sears' book, though, isn't it? Am I misremembering that? Now I'm just like, what lake? What lake? What is there a lake in Vietnam? I don't know. I mean, it was not obvious to me. No, and in fact, if you use the acronym ASL, more often than not, you'll get confused people thinking you are referring to American Sign Language. So. This book is supposed to be very good. It's expensive is why I haven't picked this up, actually. Yeah, bring it. Bring this to the wargaming community, Brant. That's what I'm saying. This might be the case. Well, I mean, it's from the Battle Hymn of the Republic, right? That's where this line comes from. And in fact, we've seen some war games also mining the Battle Hymn of the Republic for their names, like Fateful Lightning, for example, traditionally for Gettysburg games. Cross of Iron. I wonder if Cross of Iron, the movie, which is a very good movie, by the way, inspired the title of the Squad Leader's Supplement. Also, I did not put this together. I don't know why I didn't put this together. Renegade Game Studios, the people who have licensed Squad Leader and Axis and Allies, and a pile of other stuff from the friendly and not at all corporate goon-like folks at Hasbro, are also the people bringing us a bunch of other stuff, like the White Wolf books and stuff like that. I'm like, I didn't know this. These are the same people doing like a number of other gaming things, not all of which are, some of which are RPGs. All right, Grant. Who's I'm Brant. I'm going to start using that. Brant, this is great. So, yeah, this would be a big letdown if you thought that was. Yeah, well, it might be, but it's supposed to be really good. The people whose opinions I trust on this kind of stuff have highly recommended it. It's just expensive, and I haven't bought it yet for that reason. I am an absolute victim of that Kindle Deal of the Day thread on BGG. Remember when I said I had like 90 books on the American Civil War and like 60 or 70 Napoleonic books? Most of those came from that. War in the Wind sold itself to Phil based solely on the name, but he lived in Alaska, so he knew what it meant. And it's an interesting topic, too, actually. Okay. That is not a top-selling Compass Games product, let me put it that way. Oh, that might be, but I'm suggesting that the folks that were in charge at Avalon Hill at the time had just seen the movie and liked it, although it came out a few years before that, as I recall. So, I've got enough going on right now. I'm still rereading Battle Cry of Freedom, McPherson, and I have got the Road to Richmond or On to Richmond or whatever it's called by Stephen Sears queued up to go at after that. So, Del Taco. Wow. So they put a Del Taco in Columbus, so we went there. And now I call it Del Diarrhea. It makes Taco Bell look like a luxury food. It's bad. Anyway. Oh, Cross the Fire was that late? Yeah, I mean, that's my thought. You know, it's not like I'm sure folks that work for Avalon Hill and worked on Squad Leader went and saw the movie. So, yeah, not a fan of Del Taco. There's another one that's like a taco place. It's out here. I mean, in general, we don't have great taco places out here in Ohio. Let's put it that way. You'll occasionally find really good, authentic Mexican tacos at most often on a taco truck, to be honest about it. Delta, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the Baja Blast, to be honest. I like the regular Mountain Dew better, but it's just because I'm used to it, to be honest. Inferno by Max Hastings. I'll have to check this book out. I have read the Hastings book on Vietnam, which I realize is somewhat problematic. But it was also on that military history deal thread. So I didn't pay a ton of money for it. And it's a pretty good book. But it's probably, it's one of these things where I'm going to draw a distinction between, is this the first book on this topic that I've read or the 10th book on this topic that I've read? And if it was the 10th book, then the Hastings book would be a terrible choice. But if it's the first book or second book maybe, then it's not as bad of a choice. You'll have the chance to, every writer is supposed to have a point of view, and it is okay if I don't agree with that point of view. I just need to acknowledge that there's a point of view there, okay? Poop. We got just a little too much. Oh, dear. Oh, this sounds interesting, actually. Well, I mean, in El Paso, I would not expect Del Taco would do well, right? Because you got, frankly, better Mexican food there than Del Taco is able to provide. Let's put it that way. This is tough. I did not see... Star Wars came out in 1977. I did not see Star Wars on its first theatrical run. I'm not sure I saw it on its second theatrical run. I think it may have been on the third theatrical run. Because remember, that's how it worked that back in the day. Is every year or so they'd re-release it. I didn't see Star Wars until the second or third theatrical run. Empire Strikes Back was out by the time I saw Star Wars. Let's put it that way. Of course, all the kids around me had seen Star Wars, so I knew everything that was happening. I don't know. I can't explain this. Is it? Is it though, or is this where the white people go for tacos? Or out of masochism, presumably. Del Taco, don't taco. I like that. Perfidious Albion, this is a good point. Hastings is writing, he is not a historian, right? Now, that sounds dismissive, and I actually don't mean it to be dismissive. There is ample room for people to write books about history that aren't historians necessarily, and some of those books have been really good and worthwhile. But it is worth observing when that happens, that this person is not a historian and is not trained in the historical method, and therefore that should inform you somewhat about the perspective that you are going to get. So anyway, all right. So I'm actually a little shocked that this didn't come up. As mentioned, I had some problems over the weekend that did not make this happen as smoothly as I would like. I've pointed this out many times. Shelby Foote's a novelist, and he's writing not a novel, but a narrative, and you should consider that when you're reading Foote. I have seen Dune Part 2, and I thought it was pretty strong. I might do a video on it, so if I'll try to save spoilery stuff for that hypothetical production. I did like it. I thought it was very strong. If you have an affection for the book, as I do, or which I think came through in my original, I mean, it's literally, I've done one movie review ever, and it's for Villeneuve's first half of Dune, okay? So I have put a lot of thought into all of the various Dune adaptations over the years, and I have seen the Lynch film many, many, many times, and I still love that Lynch film. It's weird, but it's, there's a certain amount of weird that I think works for Dune, and I think to some extent David Lynch was in sync with that. One of the things that Denis Villeneuve's Dune cuts is the weird. There's most of it, and certainly there's some of it does find its way into the part 1, but there's almost no weirdness in part 2. All right, hold on a second here. All right, so Pentagon Wagon 5 first saw Star Wars in the drive-in theater. Mike Reed misread Stigler as Stilgar. How about that? So I liked the first one, okay? However, there's like a certain... so understand that the book... We have 2 minutes to go. We're going to go a couple minutes over here. One of the kind of key points to understand the book, there's like a whole list of these things. I'm just going to say this is right off the top. You should spot this immediately. It's set in the year 10,191. It's not 10,191 AD, 10,191 after Guild, which is about 10 or 20,000 years in the future itself. So this is like 20 to 30,000 years from now, okay? And there's like like this sort of regressive element of the technology. But there's also these Baroque layers of details that Herbert puts into the world building. not just on Arrakis, but like throughout the whole setting. And so much of that is just, there's just no room for it, right? In this adaptation. And I really felt that in part 2. There are some structural changes that Villeneuve makes that there was one particular change, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I want to avoid spoilers. At least here, if I do a video on it, I'll spoil it. There's one particular change. I had watched all the spoiler reviews. I knew exactly what I was going in for. There's one particular change that I was really concerned about going in. And there's another change that I was like, yeah, okay, I saw that coming, but I'm disappointed in it nonetheless. And I felt much better about both of those changes after having seen the movie. I thought one of those changes was pretty clever workaround to how we make this thing that happens in the book actually work on screen, given that we actually have to actually film it with actual people or special or whatever. So there's that. Jodorowsky's Dune would have been off the hook. If you've never seen the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune, it's totally worth your time, by the way. Dune, the game, does not have hidden movement. No, it does not. That's a great game, by the way. It's very asymmetric. It's very much, you could tell that it was heavily influenced by, or I think even might be even designed by some of the same people as Cosmic Encounter, but it's a much more sort of, it's much tighter than Cosmic Encounter. Cosmic Encounter is a big mess. The Chani changing, no, this was not what I was referring to. This is something that I didn't think was going to bother me, and it bothered me a little more than I thought it was going to, but I didn't think. It's not a problem only because they intend to make a part 3. If they make a part 3, then I can handle this because then there's time to kind of fill that gap in. Okay. Is this a board game, Mike Reed? I have 2 Dune board games, one of which is Dune Imperium, which I got for Christmas and which I have never done anything but open, look at, and put it back on the shelf. And I have the Gale Force 9 version of the old Avalon Hill Dune, which I have played and which is an amazing game. It's another one of those multiplayer things, though. You don't play it with less than at least 5 people. And Salvador Dali and Mick Jagger, actually. So, no, I really liked... So, yes, it does. There is some stuff that happens in the book that doesn't happen here, I think because they're saving it for a Dune Part 3, which would basically be Dune Messiah. But you basically get to the end of the first book in Dune Part 2. I did like it. I liked it quite a bit. I feel like so getting out of the theater of Part 1, I just went over it in my head for days and days and days and days. And that's always a sign that it's a good movie, even if I didn't end up liking it. And in the case of the Part 1, I did end up liking it. I'm doing that less with Part 2. Let's put it that way. There's totally room for, one can easily think of Dune Messiah as like the epilogue for Dune, the main book anyway. It's way shorter. I think it's kind of a dud of a book, to be honest, because it's a lot of talking and there's a lot of these kind of weird things, but it's also of the sequels, it's also the one that goes, it does really fit with the first book. The subsequent books begin to fit less well with the first book from Children of Dune on. So, anyway. You know what, though, one of the things with adaptations is even the worst adaptation in the world is not taking the original from you. I can always read the book. I can always go watch the Lynch movie. I can go watch the sci-fi adaptations, which are, I think, worthwhile. So, anyway. This is a straight redo too. So there's a weird thing where like some of the rules from I'm putting this together from memory. I think some of the rules from the Avalon Hill Dune are like like partitioned off into an advanced game in the Gale Force 9 Dune, and obviously the graphics are all redone. It is otherwise exactly the same game. I'll be happy. So Denis Villeneuve says he's done after Dune 3, but he's also already finished with the screenplay for Dune, or close to being finished with the screenplay. If they hand it over to somebody else, having done a good job on Dune 3, I'm cool with that. I mean, whatever. I consider us lucky to have gotten an adaptation this good. I think it's got a really good soundtrack. It's got a really good cast. Those cast members, there was another thing that I'm like, again, not surprised by, but disappointed in, that a certain thing was not there. I'll tell you what, Cyan Phillips was like, that David Lynch movie is impeccably cast. Let's put it that way. I have mixed feelings about the sci-fi miniseries. As I went into in that video, the video review of the Villeneuve Dune, I have mixed feelings about the sci-fi adaptations. I think in general they're well written and look super cheap. And in general, in the first one especially, I think the acting is just not that great. In places it's very good, and in other places it's awful. That is a problem that is pretty much totally absent. The acting problem is basically totally absent from the second adaptation they did, meaning Frank Herbert's Children of Dune. So Tom Cruise as cameo as a sandworm was in fact surprising. Shai Hulud as played by Tom Cruise. Now, I didn't go see Dune in the theater. I saw it on the David Lynch film. I saw it on cable TV, so I did not get the little dictionary that they gave you, which is interesting. Dune is a huge influence on Star Wars. Star Wars was also influenced by... John Carter is incredibly influential, and I think influences heavily even Dune. And Star Wars is also pretty heavily influenced by... I think it's less influenced by Flash Gordon. It's the obvious influences in Star Wars to me are Dune and Foundation and the Hidden Fortress. Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. R2-D2 and C-3PO are ripped directly out of the Hidden Fortress. So now, as Perfidious Albion points out, the sci-fi production, it rewrites a lot, but it doesn't really miss any of the main story beats or themes of the book. Villeneuve gets the themes right, and in fact corrects it. It's not really an issue in the first book because this element is there. But corrects an issue where the first book, one of the main themes is maybe not as crystal clear, only having read the first book, as it becomes obvious even into the second book. Okay, so yes, and I talked about this too. Desert ecology, Lawrence of Arabia, psychedelic mushrooms. Those are the inspirations for Dune. So there's that. There is a traveler adventure, which is clearly intended to be kind of a stand-in for Dune, called Urgaden of the Seven Pillars, published by FASA back in the day. If I'm not mistaken, it was done by one or both of the Keith brothers. And it rolls that sort of desert planet story kind of back to Lawrence of Arabia. It's clearly you're intended to bring a lot of Dune to it, but it, out of the book, is basically Space Lawrence of Arabia, which is fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So anyway, folks, we are... the young James McAvoy actually was very good as Leto, and the Children of Dune in general was really well cast, including the parts that they recast from the original miniseries, Jessica, Stilgar, and Duncan, Idaho. Those were parts that were not well cast in the original miniseries. They were all recast for Children of Dune, and the new cast was way better. Flat, top to bottom, way better. In addition, they brought back the standout guy from the original miniseries, which was Ian McNeice as the Baron, who was just amazing. Anyway. Oh, well, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. This kind of thing gets talked up, and, maybe there's a layer of truth to it, but I'm not sure I'm taking it that seriously. So, pre-Battletech Vasa. Oh, yeah, I've even got some of the deck plans that they did. It's nice. Anyway, folks, I would like to remind everybody, we are done for the evening. I'm going to wrap this up now. Let's get rid of that. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out this evening. A little surprised that Dune didn't come up until the very end. But it's, reflective of the delay that I had to take because I was on the can for a couple of days. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. Please do check out the links in the video description to support the channel, including the affiliate link for our friends at Noble Knight, the official Counter Clipping Show sponsor. Thank you, Noble Knight. Thank you for everybody. Dan and I will be on tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with something. I don't know what it'll be. It might be me making fun of Dan for an hour. So I hope Dan is motivated to get us a guest, because I'm not. So I think we got a guest for next week, but not this week. But we'll see. Maybe Dan has come up with something in my absence. So once again, thanks everybody for coming out this evening. We'll be back next week, and everybody have a great night.